These symbols should reduce cast time, but efficient doesn't always mean practical. Or stable for that matter. This had better be about more than my library card this time.
It could be. Should I get the librarians, or have you been behaving while I was away?
Oh, that's rich coming from you of all people, Victor. But I'm glad you made it back safely all the same. Did you find what I asked for?
Of course, though it wasn't easy. Do you know how hard it is to get elemental crystals of this purity? Never thought I'd almost get eaten by a worm over some stinking earth crystals. And you've yet to fully explain what you needed these things for.
I suppose that's fair. So allow me to elaborate. You've sat in on some of my lectures, so you understand that our world is 7 times rejoined already. This means every plant, animal, and person is now 4/7 their original etheric density. A little more than half, but by all accounts I can see, there will be no more rejoinings. We are as powerful now as we'll ever be. So then, why not experiment? If we're going to live within a sundered world, I want to know exactly where we stand and just how far we can go, even as divided as we are. And for that, we need the energy stored within crystals of extraordinary purity. That way, we can draw upon their power and not disturb the ambient aether unnecessarily. So, Victor, care to join me for today's experiments?
You said a whole lot of words, so it must have been constructed in some kind of sentiment. Unfortunately, it is lost on me. Aside from what sounds like you want to do some tests of some kind. Got a spot in mind?
Indeed I do. Let's see just how impressive even a sundered world can be. Good day, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed that little exchange, because for the past year I've gotten more than a few people asking about my take on things like roleplay, or character creation within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. I like to think that between this video skit and the many other short stories I've written, that I've proven myself to be on the side of creativity more often than not. But what does it mean to create a character in someone else's world? And how did Final Fantasy XIV become such a hotspot for roleplayers? Well, to help discuss and answer these very questions today, I have someone who knows plenty about the creative medium, as I have the talented JoCat joining me.
Hi, I'm the cat boy, what makes the videos with the funny Wiggler Chocobo helmet that yells at you all the time.
No.
Nobody cares, Matt Mercer!
Oh man.
And I love role-playing. So much that I play not only Final Fantasy XIV, but also Dungeons & Dragons, the latter as both a player and seasoned dungeon master.
With that, my friends, let's come together to understand what it means to roleplay.
For the few dozen of you who somehow don't know what roleplay is, it's essentially playing pretend. Putting yourself in someone else's imaginary shoes and acting out the actions, thoughts, and other facets of this alternate persona. Whether it be an idealized version of yourself, a derivative of a character from media, or something totally original and completely out of left field.
Indeed. This is something that's been around for so long that I'm surprised people get shocked whenever they find a roleplay group in whatever form of media. This isn't anything new to gaming, and certainly isn't anything new to humanity. Because as long as there have been actors in history, we've had roleplayers. Which means this has been around for literally thousands of years. It's essentially a social norm. But if I was to use modern day examples, I wouldn't need to reach very far. All I need to say is the name Goldshire, and I just made some of you blush, some of you cringe, and the rest of you tilt your head in confusion before searching the name on Google and immediately deleting your search history. But that's not all. Thanks to the popularity of certain shows like Critical Role, many people have come to realize just how fun it can be to get into character while playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. I myself am guilty of this, as I've role-played various characters across multiple campaigns and have enjoyed hosting one-shots as a dungeon master.
As with Scribe's Goldshire example, I'm sure plenty of people, when thinking of the nature of roleplay, often conjure up an image of a handful of nerdy weirdos acting out a cringy fantasy of theirs. And although that's at least partly true that it can be that, roleplay comes in all degrees and flavors. If you've ever had an idea of how a blank slate character in a game you played would act, or imagined a modicum of their backstory, or even what they would do in their day-to-day, that's being in the role-playing mindset. Heck, if you think about it, acting is a form of performative role-playing. It's just human nature to have an imagination and sometimes fantasize or even act out what life would be like as someone else. And of course, many pieces of entertainment media have capitalized on this base instinct of ours, such as the aforementioned video games and tabletop RPGs, and Final Fantasy XIV is no exception. Not only does it provide a venue for roleplay, an online space to interact with other real people, it also has a myriad of tools and vibes that would promote and encourage such a playstyle, even if indirectly. Your character's visual identity through glamour and preferred jobs, their thought process through the dialogue options and quests, the various emotes providing ways to express themselves in however way fits the situation, even an official tag for free companies and adventurer plates that indicate that you're looking to roleplay.
So, it was only a matter of time until Final Fantasy XIV eventually gained its own roleplay crowd. It wasn't a question of if, only when. Though, what caught me by surprise was just how quickly it caught on. Oh sure, the roleplayers weren't anything crazy at the beginning, but it eventually blew up so fast that multiple servers have been designated as strictly RP servers. And these aren't low population spots either. We're talking completely packed locations with a waiting list and bouncers at the door. Not only did roleplay catch on in Final Fantasy XIV, it caught like wildfire.
Fight clubs, stage plays, cafes and restaurants, party houses, storytime chats, talent shows. Log on to the game for long enough and odds are you might have even heard of or witnessed an RP event going on. I once chanced upon a group out in eastern Thanalan acting out a dramatic in-character lore exile of one of their members due to a heinous betrayal, casting the fiend out to wander the wilderness to atone for their crimes. I only caught a part of the whole live story, but it was fascinating to watch as they all eyeballed me in awkward silence, waiting for me to go about my business. Just kidding, they were very friendly after they finished and thanked me for not intruding.
He's not kidding. The first thing that exile was likely thinking is how to mug a catboy.
And I'd have been happy to play along.
But things like this are happening all the time, all over the place, and only your server will determine how much of it you'll be exposed to on a regular basis. But now that we have a better idea of what roleplay is, why it's here, and how popular it became, let's address how Final Fantasy XIV blew up as a role-playing MMO, and why we think it's ultimately good for the game. First off, as someone who's pored over Final Fantasy XIV's notes and various stories dozens of times over, I feel like I can see the core of why this game became such a magnet to role-players. And that is just how open-ended and loose the writing of this game really is. Throughout this game's lifetime, you can see various points where the writing team kinda threw out random plot threads willy-nilly just in case they needed something to loop back to at a later date. Some of these plot threads are never tied off despite existing for years, with one of the biggest offenders that most all the community recognizes being the Heart of Sabik. Something that was addressed as being extremely powerful as well as very old, and yet was never talked about ever again despite its relative importance in the MSQ. This open-ended style of writing, while not necessarily great for world building, is absolutely amazing for letting people come up with their own theories and ideas.
One region that immediately comes to mind for me is Corvos. The information we do have on the Garlean conquered land, at least at the current time of making this video, paints just enough of a broad picture that perhaps a Makote player, such as myself, could easily tie it into their headcanon backstory, while that very same official lore is just vague enough that not only can the writing team make new stories in the future without risking contradicting previously established lore, so too can the player.
That's right, Joe. And if the world building wasn't going to tie off certain ends, then the players can with their own personalized stories. This ultimately encourages creativity. For example, I main a Dark Knight, which might sound like an odd choice for a wandering storyteller, but it makes sense to me given how the best Dark Knights are meant to have a deep-seated sense of empathy. And what better way to embrace the countless stories and cultures of this world than with a character that is able to see life through the eyes of others rather easily.
And this doesn't have to stop at literary storytelling either, as it can go as far as to influence one's cosmetic choice as a form of visual storytelling. As a paladin, for instance, I can justify my padded clothing instead of a traditional plated set of armor by claiming I hail from Ul'dah's Sultansorn, where the environment is hot and arid, meaning loose-fitted clothing would be more preferable to wear. Or, alternatively, I could say I hail from Ishgard, where the knighthood there prefer to don a heavy mail of chain or a scaled variety made from Dragonian hide. And if those don't suit my fancy, the Paladin story does present the idea of free paladins, who do not swear their allegiance to the Sultanate or any prior organization for that matter, meaning you don't even have to abide by any sort of uniform or dress code, and it would still fit in canon.
It's this eagerness to create one's own story through their actions and appearance that I believe is one of the reasons the game's RP community got so huge so quickly. The method of storytelling in this MMO asks players to engage with the material more. At least in my case it did. I know there are many players that kinda just want to make their own story regardless of what the lore says, but frankly I always found it to be an exciting challenge to ask myself, how can I get the most out of this with the limited tools in front of me? Because I truly believe that amazing characters and settings can come from just about anywhere, even with limited resources. When it comes to storytelling, it's less about what you have in it and more about how you use it, which is what I feel to be the crux of this whole topic. Even though I don't actively roleplay in Final Fantasy XIV with other players, I've created my own character and wrote him to make sense in a world that I didn't create. But I'm not the only one doing this dance with the narrative of a fictional world, as JoCat has certainly made a reputation for himself creating interesting and fun characters over the years.
I most certainly have. Although I've not got it all set in stone yet, I very much styled it after my real-life experience with the game. My first time playing FF14 many years ago, I made a Moon Makote that started as an archer in Gridania. After losing interest in the game and bouncing back years later, I made another character, the same Makote, but this time as a gladiator of Ul'dah. I've implemented this into my character's backstory by writing, in my head at least, that he was born and raised in the Black Shroud, but moved to Thanalan for greater opportunities. I've even roleplayed in smaller ways in the form of how my character interacts with the various NPCs, like how he calls Graha by his name without the clan letter, indicating a close bond. Raha, really?
With that being said, I'd like to finally go over how the nature of roleplay and how other formats have influenced the Final Fantasy XIV crowd. Admittedly, I didn't know too much about the various RP groups of this game for the longest time, but my content has attracted hundreds of roleplay fans, and I got to know about the game's community from many different people. What caught me by surprise was just how methodical and structured it seemed to be. Most players essentially are agreeing to various rules so that everyone, regardless of their fantasy, have a chance to make something personal to them. For example, a common rule I've heard in various groups was that no one should call themselves the Warrior of Light. Personally, I think that's a great rule, since the Warrior of Light as a character is basically godlike and gets away with things that no other person in the Final Fantasy XIV world could ever hope to achieve. But I feel that these rules came from an already existing mentality when it comes to roleplay. For example, there are similar rules most players who play Dungeons & Dragons follow. Like, don't sabotage everyone's fun just because it's something you think your character would do.
For sure, as it's just common courtesy in FF14, D&D, and any other form of role-playing game to take the other role player's interests, boundaries, and most importantly, consent into account. I know a few of you more promiscuous bunch may have jumped to certain specific kinds of RP, but this applies no matter what you may be role-playing about. When it comes to NPCs, there's really no harm in developing a personal headcanon that doesn't affect anyone else. You may be the NPC's romantic partner, or long-lost sibling, or perhaps you have a prior history with them or any organization in the game's lore. That's all fine and well, and nobody can really stop you. They're NPCs. However, you can't quite do the same with another player's character without their consultation. I mean, you can, but it's common etiquette that you don't toss your own role-playing ventures on somebody else if they don't agree to it. and doing so anyway, despite their lack of interest, would be rightly looked down upon. Collaborative storytelling can be a very fun activity and may sometimes result in unforgettable memories and truly amazing pieces of fanfiction that can potentially rival even the source material in some eyes. But how one goes about it must be done with the utmost care in regards to the other real people they are doing it with. Not everyone has to roleplay with everyone else, but whoever you do choose to do it with, you must respect their boundaries. And hey, if someone's rules for roleplay don't align with yours, whether it be their headcanon conflicting with your character's lore, or they don't wish to play along with your /EM prompts, there is no shame in realizing that you might just not be compatible to roleplay with them, and go about your way. It's important to yes and, but a roleplayer that knows how to take no for an answer is a good roleplayer.
Agreed. And just like running Savage content, I wouldn't expect to be welcome in every Savage team. So if you do roleplay, make sure you're finding people whose interests reflect your own. If characters from other forms of media can have that hero's journey and steadily grow into something more than the sum of their parts, then it can happen in other places as well, even roleplayers in Final Fantasy XIV. So, if you're going to write a backstory for your character in Final Fantasy XIV, Dungeons & Dragons, or anything for that matter, I would always insist that you shouldn't focus too hard on where the character starts or where they end up. It's all about the journey in between. What kind of things happened to them along the way? How did these things affect or change them, and why? It's very easy to lose sight of things if all you can imagine is the destination, or how cool your character would be at maximum power. But instead of rushing to your final chapter and finishing your story too soon, why not take your time and enjoy the ride alongside your fellow adventurers?
And know that the only person you should be writing your story for is for you and those alongside that story. So long as everyone involved is in agreement and working together, even if that means it's just you can and should write whatever makes you happiest.
And with that, I think we've covered a lot today. So to those of you who love to roleplay in games like Final Fantasy XIV, keep on going. I hope you're having an amazing time, and if any of you were thinking of roleplaying, or at least writing down your own character's backstory, don't be afraid to try. My hope is that videos like this encourage more people to get creative. But once more, I'd like to thank JoCat for joining me today and possibly again in the future. If this video does well, I don't see why we can't try something else later down the line. After all, Final Fantasy XIV has no end of stuff to pick at, both in story and in gameplay.
And thank you so much again for having me, Scribe. I'm in love with the various stories and aspects of storytelling in this game, and getting the opportunity to talk about it with another so well versed in it is a wonderful opportunity.
If you've not already, go check out JoCat's amazing animations and hilarious videos. I guarantee you'll have a good time over on his channel. I've certainly been a big fan of his for many years now. But as for me, I have been the Synodic Scribe, and you know I'll be hard at work gathering and weaving together even more stories for you to enjoy very soon. So, until next we meet, stay safe, my friends.
So, Thancred versus Raubahn?
One-armed Raubahn or both arms Raubahn?
Let's say one-armed Raubahn and ether impotent Thancred.
Nah, the skinny Midlander doesn't stand a chance.
A Midlander who knocked out a Gubu with a single punch during the Grand Melee?
You make it sound like Raubahn couldn't do the same dang thing.
Okay, but can Raubahn go invisible?
He doesn't need to. The guy has years of one-on-one combat under his belt.
And Thancred held his own against Ranjit.
You and I both know that's a poor comparison.
Thal's balls it doesn't. Do you have any idea what sort of nonsense power justifications this game has already made? You can push the line a little further for an old monk from a parallel world who wields a soul dragon.